All right, I'm live for the mental health unscripted chat. And for those of you wondering, yes, I did just go on a run. So I've been doing a little run challenge lately for myself where I've done a run every day for the last 54 days or something like that. But some days it's harder than others to get the run in. Yeah, 54 days. And so today it was a little bit of a challenge to get the run in. I'm going to make sure I'm not on these headphones. So if you can't hear me for a second, I'm putting these headphones away because if I don't put them away, sometimes it clicks over automatically. Anyway, so it was hot and I'm tired. So if I'm a little slower on the uptake, that's Sunday fatigue, sure, but also the heat of Florida and trying to run in the Florida heat. All right, so here we are for our mental health unscripted chat. We get together every Sunday and we talk about random mental health related stuff for anybody who wants to participate in the chat. So please do come with your questions. Oh, thank you for the thumbs up. Thank you for the hi. I really do thrive on getting questions in this hour. So I will chat about anything related to mental health, but I really love it when I get questions so I can participate in that. I try to keep it as anonymous as possible so I don't call out, hey, Steve Phillips, is an imaginary name. I see Steve Phillips in the chat and you're asking about, what to do about depression, right? But with that said, it's obviously a public forum, so it's not private. If you have my number, feel free to privately message me. I do try to keep up with that while I'm doing the chat. This is the multitasking. If one day this channel blows up and has thousands of subscribers, then I'll probably get an assistant to navigate the different things and make it all smooth. Until then, there will be pauses, like right then. But anyway, can you talk more about three ladies from earlier? The Karaites. Yeah, so CH in Greek is the Kar sound, K. So it's spelled Charites in Greek. They're also known as the Three Graces. They are mythological figures, and they are goddesses that I can never remember the three of their names, but they are the naked dancing ladies. So they are the in Greek culture, beauty, art, dance, celebration, all of these things are seen as a virtue. They're not seen as frivolous. There's not, so there's some interesting things that have kind of happened in Western civilization where we took the concept of soulfulness, which is the reflection of experiences that creates wisdom and commitment. And there's a lot of great things about soulfulness, but we kind of took it to an extreme to the point where I think we undermined some mindfulness things, some being present, some experiential things. And we tend to almost talk, and Christians are one of the worst for this, almost talk like now moment experiences are negative, but long-term planning and making sure that your commitment to the future is positive. Now, of course, there is some truth to that. You can go to the push for pleasure, right, and lose sight of tomorrow. So I love this little Homer Simpson quote where he's about to do something stupid. I can't remember if it's drink a lot of alcohol or drink a glass of lard. It was something really horrible and stupid. And Marge is trying to tell him about the consequences of his actions. Like, well, don't you think about what this is going to do to you, kind of thing. And Homer's response is, that's a problem for future Homer. Man, I don't feel good for that guy. Or man, I feel bad for that guy, right? So that's not a problem for me. That's a problem for future Homer. So obviously there's a reality that we can get so much focus on delights of the moment that we get lost in it. But I think that we have overstressed the caution of that sometimes, or some of us have grown up in cultures that only talk about momentary delights as if they're shallow. And this gives us a problem of an intellectual dishonesty, because all of us, well, not everybody dances. I guess there are some cultures that don't see dance as positive, but most, even religious cultures, dance. Most people laugh, right? Like, if you are trying to experience this wholeness of life or the seriousness of life without laughter, if you're trying to work on yourself and your focus is self-improvement to the detriment of dancing, laughing, play. This is really what we're talking about. So the Cartwrights, the Graces, were like the party animals of the mythological world. They were the goddesses of celebration, and not in a way. Now, of course, with Greek mythology, none of the goddess or gods were like benevolent. They were not necessarily all good, right? Because the idea in mythological narrative was more about what Jungian would describe as archetypes. Now, Jungian, psychologist, same time period as Freud, looked at mystical experiences in a way that didn't undermine them. So like Freud tended to minimize that and thought everything was either a drive towards the ego or the id being impulses, delights, sexual desires, the ego being identity, self-understanding, so how you see yourself. And Freud's worldview were not very delightful. It was a very dark world that Freud lived in. It was like you're driven by this subconscious desire for sex or power, a lot of it. Jung thought more in symbols and saw purpose, and so he didn't undermine mythological stuff. He focused on that. Oh, I just remembered the pin thing that I can do. So we got a new question in that pin this message. There it is. It's pin. How to improve. See, the problem is when I pin it. Okay, it's how do you improve your ability to trust people? Okay. I'm sorry about the brief break for sipping my thing. I have to stay hydrated. Okay. So here's what I actually have a client right now that first thing he said to me is he doesn't trust anyone or anything. Now, I'm going to challenge that belief as a therapist, because if truly you had no trust whatsoever, you couldn't function in society. Like, you couldn't have a job, you couldn't pay anything to anyone, because any interaction that you have with a human being takes trust. In fact, getting out of bed takes trust. You're trusting so many things. You're trusting the bed. You're trusting the ground underneath you. You're trusting the principle of gravity. You're trusting your legs, right? You're trusting your feet. You're trusting so many different things without even thinking about it. So the reality is we all actually make, you could say, assumptions. And when I'm working with a client that says they're having a hard time trusting, the first thing that I want to do is to help them really be specific on what they mean about trust, because they don't have this grand issue of trust like they're talking about. I just don't trust people. It's actually usually way more specific. And when we get more specific on what triggers their distrust of people, so they actually do trust people, by default most of the time. Most people do. But there's certain areas in which they distrust people. And those areas almost always resolve back to wounds that they haven't fully healed and processed from. And some of the reasons why we have these wounds that aren't fully addressed, but our mind won't let us fully let go of them, is because there's still a lesson to be learned. And until we can articulate that lesson, our brain goes in bigot mode. Okay? Like, that's the blunt way of putting it. So this is the non-technical way of describing it. Bigot mode is, I can't really tell exactly why I was hurt or who specifically hurt me. So I'm just going to paint a really broad brush for the moment to protect myself until I understand exactly how to draw the line of where I was hurt and how to prevent that from the future, right? So if you think logically, if your brain's trying to keep you safe, right? Your brain isn't trying to make you happy, it's trying to keep you safe. And it goes, okay, let's just say, well, I'll come up with a random name, okay? I'm using, I don't know why, but the name's Steve today. So let's say Steve gets really hurt. And Steve's brain, which is not exactly who Steve is, his brain works with Steve, but is not his entire identity. So if Steve is his idea of himself, and then Steve's brain is the mechanics of how he functions. Steve gets hurt, but he hasn't really processed what the hurt comes from. Maybe it was a breakup. Maybe he had some struggles with his family. And so Steve goes, screw this. I'm never going to trust anyone ever again. The brain goes, got it, check, right? Limiting belief established. And now let's function as if that's the case to some degree, right? It's doing that because it's like going, okay, so Steve hasn't actually clarified who he was hurt by, how he was hurt in a way that actually improves Steve's behavior. So we're going to keep that wound around because it's a reminder that he could be hurt again and that he needs to process this stuff. Hopefully, our brain's thinking, he's going to process this stuff so we can start trusting people again, because we kind of need to, right? We need to function in life. But until Steve's willing to look at the specifics of what lessons he can actually move forward, and those lessons might be very small, then we're going to paint that broad brush. Liam Neeson, actually, it's really sad how this happened. He did this great interview where he was very honest about this bigoted moment where, I can't remember exactly the details, but someone who was black hurt someone he cared about. And he was so angry that I think he ended up taking like a baseball bat or a lead pipe or something and wanted to go whole, like the Taken, series. He wanted to like live that out, but like just beat up random black people. And he was sharing this story as a lesson that he learned because he realized how irrational that response was, how his brain was responding with this bigoted response. It had nothing to do with black people. It was one black person that hurt someone he cared about. And he was kind of explaining how that's how generalizations happen. That's how racism happens, and doing it in a way of self-disclosure. And people reacted. People wanted to like cancel him for a while and made this big deal about like, oh, Liam Neeson, racist and everything like that. When I think he was doing a very anti-racist thing. He was explaining the concept of where a lot of these bigoted ideas come from in our brain. And so when you go to how to improve your ability to trust people, I mean, the answer is healing the wounds that cause distrust, but specifically getting, very narrow, very, I actually used the word wrong, but you're very specific on what exactly the problem is so you can address that better. From now on, I'm asking questions about Steve. What if Steve is feeling, etc. Yeah, go for it. Let's have Steve be. We don't have a Steve in the chat. If we do, we'll have to pick another name. But until we get Steve in the chat, we can blame all our problems on Steve and give all of our diagnoses. Steve has everything. He has schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety. Steve's a big old mess. So Steve can't trust people. After we get specific, here's the like every form of therapy that works is some element of exposure therapy. Hello, Richard. Happy to be joining. Happy to have you. Thanks for coming in. We're talking about Steve, who is our generic guy problem that has all of the problems in the world. Even though there's no real Steve. So Steve's not based on a real person. But anyway, Steve's got trust issues. Once he identifies what specifically those trust issues are, right, where they come from, you got to separate then wisdom from wound. Okay? So like, for instance, there might be all of my friends were alcoholics, and hanging out with them, hopping from bar to bar, didn't make my life better, right? That's a very specific thing. Steve needs help getting along and setting boundaries with in-laws. Okay, this is what I'm saying. This is the trust issues, is that Steve needs help getting along and setting boundaries with in-laws, which, by the way, so that's kind of what I'm saying about, that's where I'm going to with the example of the alcoholic friends that are bar hopping, that are bringing about negative things in your life, right? Now, general broad brush, you could be like, these people are bad, right? These people are terrible. I hate these people, whatever. I don't trust them anymore, right? They've screwed me over one too many times, and no, I'm never going to trust them again. By the way, we're getting a little visit from the star here. Yep. There's the angel. Anyway, yep, that's right. The famous Ripley is joining us on the couch. But anyway, so I'm never going to trust these people. They're bad, when maybe the boundary that needs to be set, the lesson, the wisdom from the wound is just, let's create a boundary where I don't go bar hopping with these people. I can still remain friends with them, but I'm not going to go to multiple different bars. I love how everybody's saying hi to Ripley. That's so cute. Yeah, I knew what you meant, Ripley. She's not upset when you get she probably actually would respond to Riley. Yeah, she responded. Ripley. Riley. See? Yep. She's like looking at me like, you're definitely calling me. Why are you calling me? So she doesn't know the difference between Riley and Ripley. But anyway, they sound similar enough. The concept of getting very specific and setting boundaries to build trust, because what we're not. So here's basically what I'm kind of saying very poorly. If your concept of trust is built on you never have to set any boundaries with the person because you know that they will be a good for you no matter what, then I don't want you to rebuild trust. As a therapist, I sure hope, and this is going to sound bad out of context, but as a therapist, I hope that you never trust anyone again if your definition of trust is you think that you can always rely on them to bring good in your life without any boundaries. That is a codependent relationship. It's not healthy, and you should have exactly 0 of those relationships in your life. I don't care if they're your parent, your child, your significant other, your spouse, brother, friend. There should be healthy boundaries in every relationship that you have. So if your definition of trust is they're only going to bring good in my life, I never have to manage the relationship. I never have to think about whether they're bringing good or not. I don't have to do any of those, things to, discern, um, create boundaries, right? I'm trying to use a different language to describe it to make it more clear what I'm talking about. Like, I never have to tell them what I want. They should just know it. You know, that stereotype, often stereotyped with women. Like, if it's like, um, if you don't know already, I'm certainly not going to tell you. What's the phrase that they joke about women saying or whatever? We all should be communicating our needs, expressing what's going too far, and every relationship has to be categorized. Okay, so I'll use an example. They're never gonna let me down. You just rickrolled the whole chat. Is it rickrolled? I can't remember now. But anyway, my dad is one of the men that I love the most. Okay, and I trust my dad according to my definition of trust. But according to a lot of people that tell me that they struggle with trust, I wouldn't trust my dad, because it's not like when my dad gives me advice, I naturally assume he's right all the time and I do whatever he says. Now, I can trust my dad. Okay, good. I was right. If you don't know why I'm mad, I can't help you. Yeah, that's kind of the gist of it, right? It's like, if you can't use your words, I don't know if you can help yourself. My dad is always going to be for me in intentions. I believe that. So that's the definition of trust, right? But that doesn't mean that his effect is always going to be positive. Now, if all of a sudden I asked Dad about a financial decision that I was trying to make, and I was like, I can either buy this thing, or this thing. So A, B, or C. And he goes, what the heck? Buy all three. Who cares? Just, it's fine, right? I'd go, Dad, did you hit your head? Something's wrong. I'm now distrusting you, right? Because he's acting out of character from the man that I have known pretty much my entire life. I mean, let's put a little years of cognitive development where I wouldn't say I actually knew him. But as soon as I could identify the element that was my dad, that was not it, right? I'd be very highly suspicious. And I'd be like, there's something else going on here. Now, it wouldn't necessarily mean something really bad. It could be something going on with him. It could be information that I don't know, right? But something is awry, because my dad, the man that I trust, is going to be generally fiscally conservative, right? That's my dad, right? So, if my dad all of a sudden acts out of character, I'm going, something is wrong here, right? That's, I think, what trust really looks like. It's this knowing of who the person is and accepting of who that person is. And part of accepting is going to be with limitations and boundaries. So I'm not going to give access to that person all the time. That should come alongside of trust. So as trust grows, it's growing with my knowledge of when the person has strengths that I can lean on and when the person has weaknesses that I have to be aware of and careful of, because what I'm actually building is a relationship with a real human being, not my idea of an ideal. And so that's what I would say is most of the people that have trust issues, it's a wound that they haven't fully processed and healed. And it's that they are trying to fall in love with their idea of an ideal, not a genuine person. And you are never going to experience a healthy relationship if you don't have boundaries. You're giving unlimited access because you're trying to build that person into this fantasy character that not one real human being can ever live up to. And then what happens is a negative feedback loop, which, by the way, people that have been in traumatic childhood environments do this a lot. And they typically do it with their romantic partner as the number one person. And they kind of usually go, I don't trust anyone else, but I'm going to trust the romantic partner that I have completely and intimately with every issue that I ever have in my life. Right. And this is where we get negative feedback loops because one, as the divorce rates in America can tell you, intimate relationships are not the most stable relationships. So there's I actually don't know this statistically, but you could fact check me on this. All right, see if this is right. Far more people have relationships with their children, let's say, than people have relationships with significant others in the past, right? So whether current or former, right, the percentage of significant relationships that last an entire life versus this percentage of childhood and parent relationships that last an entire life. I'm betting that one's better in American society, right? I would probably venture that more people have their best friend, that they have the best friend for life than romantic relationships. And I'm not just talking because you cannot just talk about divorces, right? If you dated 10 people in your life that you had serious relationships with, and you're currently in a relationship with one of them, that means only 10% of those relationships are currently lasting. Might not even last longer. So it's like that's already fairly low percentage. If you then look at best friends and the percentage that lasts, I don't know. I think they'd probably do better, right? So all that to say, if you build trust with just one person that is your intimate partner, you're probably going to struggle with trust issues for the rest of your life. Hey, let's keep this chat going and keep the questions coming because I feel like I've fairly well covered that question of the chat. I could go back to the naked dancing ladies called the Karaites, the Three Graces. If you look it up online, by the way, that's an easy way to look it up, is the Three Graces, and you can find the three of them have a different name, as with most Greek mythology, and they have like a specific element to them, but they kind of overlap because they're principles. So, I don't really know how much the Greek world believed in these gods and goddesses in the way in which we think of belief, right? Because we think of it as it either materially exists or not, which is a very scientific based way of looking at life. And I think the Greeks really thought a lot more about truth, principles, as things that exist in reality, not material as something that you can touch, right? So I don't know if many of the Greeks actually believed there were three naked goddesses that danced in heaven and were the life of the party. I think it more was a principle in life. So when you study Greek mythology, it's good to try to get out of that material-based scientific method mode to go into the intangible principles of life and think of it as storytelling. Kind of like we think of Marvel characters, right? There's a lot of life principles, but very few people actually believe that there is a Spider-Man out there somewhere and they could, find him somewhere in Brooklyn. Is that where I think he's from? Anyway, Steve would like to know some specific tools for not managing outcomes. FYI, there are 4 Steves listening on my account right now. We all say hello. Hello to the Steves of the world. So Steve might change. Okay, so Steve would like specific tools. Let's see, replace pin message. Specific tools on how to not manage outcomes. I mean, acceptance is going to be like, they're basically, acceptance is the principle and specific techniques to practice acceptance in that. So one of which is, you've probably navigated managing outcomes because you felt like you had to. And so the first thing to do to put your guard down and give yourself enough space that you don't start to manage the outcomes is start to realize that you are currently safe. And if you're not safe, you wouldn't be able to process whether you're managing outcomes or not, because you'd have to respond with instinct in that moment. Right? So giving, there's that quote, between every stimulus and response, there's a space. Learn to master that space. We want to extend the space between a stimulus and response as long as possible. And one very specific method you can use is breathing, counting, or distracting yourself until you respond. And that can sometimes be enough. So in other words, what you can do is you can change settings, walk around before you respond, take a moment to just reflect and meditate. Doesn't even have to be on the topic. Now, it would be great to go through the Simple ACT tool from Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, which is an acronym that spells out ACT. So that's an easy way to remember it, which is accept, choose, take action. So the first step, I'm looking through the circumstances. I'm accepting what those are. The second is I'm writing down all of my different choices. And then I'm seeing which one lines with my values the most. And then I'm taking action on that thing. Okay. How to nicely confront someone. Let's change the pin. Let me know if that answered your question. How to nicely confront someone that is using emotional coercion. I know they don't realize they're doing it, and they are very defensive even when confronted. Ooh, Steve likes that question a lot. Which Steve? Hey, welcome to the chat. Example, dramatically and with extreme urgency says, I really need you to do this. Please do it for me as a huge favor, etc. Yeah, and doing this like emotional pressuring and manipulation. So people are always going to respond defensively to a accusation. So you don't want to accuse them, right? But you do want to empathically share how you feel, right? And most people can get there if you start with empathy first for them and then draw them to how you feel in the situation, right? So what you're trying to basically get them to see is, how would they feel if they were put in your shoes? Now, for the people that are good at empathy, this is automatic. So you don't have to take them through the baby steps. But with somebody who is not naturally empathic, you've got to kind of take them through the logical process of how explaining how they would feel if they were put in these situations, and then draw them back to realizing that's what they're doing. Because if you start at, this is, you realize you're doing emotional coercion right now, most people are going to respond defensively who are people that use emotional coercion. One of the things is it works, and they've gotten, so I mean, people at their basic level respond to rewards, operant conditioning, right? Since they've been able to do it and gotten away with it in the past, and that's one of the things. The first step is to not let them get away with it. And it's simple. I refuse to reward negative behavior is a fairly good principle to live by. So like I had a friend who, had done a lot of bad things back when he was an addict and then lived in recovery. and really was super servant hearted in his response. And so what he does is he's like super generous, super nice, and that's great. But one time there was this guy who was taking advantage of him. And I knew that pointing out to him that he's letting himself be walked on, my friend that's the servant-hearted person, let's call him Steve. Okay, Steve is the servant-hearted person, and Frank is the guy taking advantage of him. So if I point out to Steve, Frank's taking advantage of you, Steve's going to say, I don't know, that's all right. I don't really care. I don't mind. But my response was, yeah, but what you're doing is you're teaching Frank the wrong way to live. Because even if you don't mind, you're not everyone. And most people are going to be like, screw Frank. Frank's a jerk. Frank keeps taking advantage of me. I don't want to hang out with Frank anymore. And then Frank ends up burning bridges. And sure enough, that's what was happening in Frank's life. There were very few people that had any time for Frank because he was always trying to take as much as he could possibly get. Now, Frank was in a bad situation. And so you can make excuses for Frank. But what I had to explain for Steve to do is you got to stop rewarding Frank's bad behavior, and you got to start modeling the right way to do things for Frank and take him through that step by step. Oh, I got another like. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the likes. The algorithm helps it out. Any of those thumbs up on the videos are huge. So the first step is you said how to nicely confront someone that is using emotional coercion. Let's play the long game. Whether you confront them or not is irrelevant. Stop rewarding their behavior. In other words, if and you can basically, and you could tell them this. I mean, this would be a confrontation. If they say, I really need you to do this, please do it for me. It's a huge favor. To say, look, I'm going to say no to you anytime you come at me with that kind of urgency and anxiety. And that's a shame because maybe sometime it is going to be an emergency and the answer is still going to be no because you've done it too many times. I love you and I want to help you, but I need you to be able to respect my free choice, my agency in the way that you ask, right? I mean, that would be a way that would be confrontation. Maybe not the nicest way. The nicest way is much slower in the baby step, getting them to have empathy. Steve would like tips for friends with anxiety. And let's see if the next one is related. Steve wants to know if you know about mini wife syndrome and any suggestion to break it cold turkey. This is when mini wife syndrome is when you end up having a relationship with somebody who is a little person, and you've got a wife, but they're very small, and so it's hard to find rides to take them on, and so you want to give up that relationship, right? This is that what you're referring to it? Mike loves to say, play the long game. Yes, actually, it's funny you say that, by the way, because I had in a sermon recently where I talked about play the long game, and I couldn't help but think God plays the long game was specifically the quote. And I almost wrote it as a Mike Croteau quote, which I try not to use people's names in the chat, and I just did. Sorry, Mike Croteau, called you out, but it was for a good thing. I don't think he'd mind that. But anyway, so mini wife syndrome is not actually a diagnosis or anything. And no, it does not have to do with. Hi, Ripley. There's Ripley came to the other side of the couch. It's not actually a term that's like an official diagnosis or like a real thing. But it's to describe a family dynamic where a daughter is treated more like a spouse than a child. Is this what we're talking about? So it's kind of those emotional incestual relationships where like there's not healthy boundaries and it turns into kind of enmeshment. sometimes can be, well, they're varying degrees of how emotionally inappropriate it is. By the way, this is Ripley's, and this is this case that she doesn't actually fully fit in, but she loves to try. It's like she thinks of herself as a smaller than she actually is. She is a dainty little angel, but she always tries to fit into this little compartment, but she's a little too big. Cats are fluid, yeah. Well, it's funny because like she'll be like half hanging out, but like trying to huddle her way in there, and then she's gone. I wasn't saying it as an insult. Anyway, hopefully I didn't hurt her feelings. Okay, so yes, that is what you're talking about. Do you have a specific question about mini wife syndrome? Because I'm going to bounce back to the other Steve question, which would like tips for friends with anxiety. One of the things that I say a really easy tip. Yeah, Ripley is so adorable. So cute. Thank you. A really easy tip for friends with anxiety is don't ask them to breathe, just breathe in front of them. And you can actually do it in the way where you say, hey, would you mind if I just take a second and do a couple deep breaths? Because I just want to make sure that I'm calm and I want to support you. And, you know, I want to be here for you. And so I'm going to, you know, just do a few deep breaths. Is that okay? Or something like that. I find that if you do 10 deep breaths, they'll at least join you for 3. Very few people will not. And then they'll just start breathing. So if you tell them to calm down, that doesn't really help. So how does the mini wife help? How does the mini wife help to stop it? So you're saying that basically if you're the child, right, and you're being treated by your parent as if you're like a spouse in an emotional way, how do you get that person to stop? I mean, boundaries is going to be the number one principle for that. Helping them build an emotional support system that is not simply reliant on you will be another aspect of that. Realizing that you are not responsible for your parent. Making sure that you actually, or like wife break me. Okay. Or like wife break mini wife. I don't know if I'm phrasing it right. Okay, somebody else in the chat, let me know if they understand that. How does wife make child be child again? How does wife make child be child again? So are you the parent in this example? Or are you the child in this? Is that what we're talking about? I just got a text and I'm wondering. Okay. So if you're not the child or the parent in this situation, but you're just witnessing this stuff, that's a little bit different. Okay. So that you're going to have to do twofold. For the parent, I would not attack the emotional support that they're getting from the child, but I would encourage emotional support from other sources, right? Again, focusing on, you're the parent. Okay. Focusing on building, right? Positive reinforcement, operant conditioning. Again, people respond to positive conditioning. So people will do what they're rewarded for. Anytime you can do that, that's going to help, right? In some ways you want to, I mean, it's hard because they've already are going to have an established thing. And there usually is some kind of a reason why they feel like they cannot connect with other people that makes it easier and more comfortable to connect, even with this enmeshed relationship that has become inappropriate. It's probably a relationship where they're getting a lot of identity from it. It might be something where they feel like they're making up for past mistakes. So there's a lot of times people get stuck in these enmeshments because they're compensating. So in other words, they had some past regret that they haven't fully processed and healed from, maybe even a moral injury that they feel guilty from, and they think that they're making up for it by having these inappropriate relationships. That can be part of the problem. So helping them see how they can process through that is another way to not directly attack the issue, because they'll probably react negatively to that, but help them build bridges to have more appropriate relationships. I'm just, full disclosure here, I'm also reading text messages from people that are explaining situations a little bit more. So if you're kind of like, where is he getting this information from? That's switching what he's talking about. It's partly because I'm also responding to texts. Love you too. Yeah. And so, you're going to want to encourage connection apart, right? And reward that. And through you, okay, so somebody else is asking, what is a mini wife? So we're talking about when there's specifically a relationship with a child and a parent that has become enmeshed. And the term enmeshed is when basically they're connected and overlapping in a way that's inappropriate. So this doesn't necessarily mean anything like physical, but maybe just emotional. Steve is struggling to be Steve for everyone, but glad they get to ask. Yeah. Are you saying the parent is the one that needs to reframe? I think they both do, obviously. It depends. It depends on the situation. So sometimes this situation and enmeshment can be because the child is reinforcing it. Often it becomes an echo chamber where it becomes a negative feedback loop. Like, because what the parent is doing in that child is they're getting them stuck. It creates arrested development. I mean, even the scripture says, like, for this reason, a man leaves his, mother and clings to a wife, right? That, like, it's by our design that we are not always dependent on the parent. And I can tell you that when I was like a pastor, there were times when I first saw it. You know how you can see other people's mistakes easier than you can see your own? There was this situation that happened where these two church members were arguing with each other. They were both adults, and they really didn't need anyone to come in. And this pastor came in to like navigate the whole thing. And he was complaining about his need to do it, but there was no reason that he jumped in. He just jumped in and made everything worse. And I watched that and I thought, how does he not see that he made everything worse by jumping into that situation? And he wasn't really needed at all. And then the thought occurred to me, it's like, oh, that was because he gets something emotionally out of feeling needed. And so it wasn't really about whether he was needed or whether he helped. But this kind of, last week I talked about a concept called existential kink, which is essentially how we can have a compulsion to do things that are not healthy, but we're driven to do it because of a, kind of taboo desire that we would say that we don't like, but there's something that pulls us to it. So like an example of this is somebody who gossips all the time, but would say that gossiping is bad and say that they wouldn't like to gossip, but then you see them doing it all the time. Or somebody that's complaining, and it seems like their favorite thing to do throughout the day is complain. But if you ask them, they would say they hate complaining. There's something that pulls them into that, right? So even though this parent might say they want their child to become a fully functional adult, they are doing things that are clearly, and even in their own admission, if they really were down to it, I mean, this is all enabling. All enabling works this way, right? Working at cross purposes. So what they're doing is making their child less independent, less capable, less strong. And if they thought about it, going back to what I said earlier in the chat of, stimulus and response and making that space bigger, they would realize that what they're doing is actually detrimental to their child, but they're not realizing that because they don't want to realize that, because they want to be needed, right? And so if you're on the outside and you're watching this and you're going, how can I help this person? It's helping them see their worth, not built on the identity of that relationship. Where's my hair? I don't know. It's like, that's the one thing that I saw in the chat. It's all scrunched up in there for the run. It's all in the, would you call this a do-rag? I don't know. Bandana. It's all up top. Anyway. All right. Back to the chat. Hence divorce rates. Let's go Team Jesus. Oh, and yes, Team Jesus. Hippie. LOL. Nice. Just letting everyone know it's the head sock. Yes, that is accurate. Yeah, I'm in my dirty hippie era. I don't know if there's such a thing as a clean hippie, but I am definitely not a good example of that if there is one. Are you saying the parent is one that needs a refund? Okay, I already answered that question. Yes, do-rag. See if it fits. Okay, cool. So we've been talking about the idea of mini wife syndrome, which is for those of you weren't part of that chat, is this thing where there becomes an enmeshment. There are clean hippies. Okay, fair enough. I'm sure there are. I'm sure they're very clean hippies. I'm just right now dirty and I look like a hippie. Although I will say that there's probably less clean hippies, because it depends on what you mean by clean, right? We're I'm calling myself a hippie. People of the earth, nature-driven people. You were saying that the parent needs to feel needed, and what makes the enable. Yeah. So, in terms of talking about the mini wife syndrome, really fits with any codependent relationship, and what we're trying to do in helping somebody out of a codependent relationship is gently helping them to see sometimes that they're actually causing harm to the person that they are trying to help, but also, and maybe first and foremost, that their identity is not built on that relationship, and that whatever, if it's shame that drove them into it, or just a desire to control that person, which is probably subconscious. They probably don't see it as control. They might see it as they're being super loving and super supportive and super helpful. But seeing that these elements that they're trying to navigate are not their responsibility. And that what you want to give somebody, if you want them to be a healthy, independent relationship, have a healthy, independent relationship and be a healthy, independent person, is freedom and responsibility. You need to give them agency. You need to give them empowerment, right? So here's the thing. Maybe they're afraid of letting go. Maybe they're afraid of watching that person actually get out of the nest and flap their wings. And maybe they're afraid that the person's going to fall, but maybe it's not that. Maybe it's afraid of what are they going to have or be if they identify primarily, like the sickest version of what you're talking about is that mother that ends up getting murdered by her daughter, with the by proxy or something. Hold on, I'm going to look that up for a second. What's it called? No, that's not it. There's a term for it. The best dependencies are not independency, but interdependency. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Got it in the chat. Munchausen syndrome by proxy, right? Which is basically where the most famous case, which is really interesting. There's an interesting documentary on that. Yeah, is where the mother is like making her daughter sick because she gets something emotional over feeling that need to then make her better again. Right. And like, that's a really extreme form. I'm not saying that this person is doing that, that we're talking about, but like, that's the sickest version of what we're talking about with that codependency and enmeshment. And when they start to identify that's what they're doing, it's like, what's the fear? How can I process through and get healthier? Do you think it's possible for a previous, do you think, by the way, I'm loving this chat. Thank you guys for being so active. Do you think it's possible for previously codependent Steves to become healthy? Absolutely. You just need to start building that interdependence that another person in the chat talked about. I don't believe hippie title denotes any degree of cleanliness. No, of course not. Ruby Blanchard is that example, yes, of that syndrome by proxy. Yeah. So, yes, building interdependencies, seeing, teaching about autonomy and agency, building that as a value and part of the value system for how we do it. And it goes back to the managing outcomes thing. I don't manage outcomes. I live my values. If I have a better understanding of my values, and part of that is understanding agency and watching people flourish, which I do better the more I realize who I am. So this is this thing that actually ends up becoming like we get trapped in a negative feedback loop of people pleasing and codependency and all this nastiness until we start to build self-regard, where we start to see ourselves as separate individuals. And then we can ironically actually connect and feel love more than we could before any of that. So on the other side of some therapy and processing and all these things, and it is a difficult process because you need to build that positive self-regard, then the person can see themselves as an individual, which helps them create more love and connection and experience intimacy. Then they might have a better relationship even with that person that they used to be codependent with than they did before it. But they have to be willing to let go of control and face their fears of separation. They might need rejection and separation for a season. It's not forever, right? Not living your values and not managing outcomes, right? So if I'm trying to make someone happy, even, I am managing outcomes. And there's an effect that is interesting where you can make a positive effect by just living your values, right? Being happy around someone. But the moment you try to make them happy, there usually is a pushback, and it's actually going to make them less happy. And you end up usually building a codependent dynamic where they're becoming less and less happy, and you're becoming more and more feeling responsible for their happiness. And it's a negative feedback loop because what you did is you, instead of living your values, started to manage outcomes. And you got to give up that. And the first step in that usually is chaos. The first step in that might be them getting worse. You can't go back to enabling. You have to keep it space. Thank you for helping the Steves of the world. I appreciate that. God loves you all, and so do I. I'm going to go eat ice cream now and still have abs in the morning. Okay, I would hate me too, he said. Yeah, well, we all hate you for that reason. But anyway, no, we all love you. All right, so that's the chat for the day. This chat took a little bit good and going, but man, I loved it. I appreciate all of you guys. Please tune in next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. This is a life-giving chat for me when we get a lot of people talking and a lot of people questioning and, giving in the chats. It makes it so much more enjoyable for me. So I really do appreciate you guys and love you all. So we'll talk soon. See you next time, Sunday, 7:00 for this live stream again. All right. Have a good one. Bye. Oh, hey, wait. Is Ripley gonna? Yeah, we end with Ripley. Yay, Ripley! Coming in for the end of the chat. Get that cute Ripley cuddle. She's like, Marv, this is my time now. Good night, everybody. God bless you guys. Have a great night.